So on its surface, this seems like a deadly kill shot of an argument against pair programming. Seems super logical and reasonable. If I have two people, why wouldn't I split them up? They're going to get twice as much done. If I pair them together, they'll have to get more than twice as much done to make up for that deficit, and that just doesn't seem like that's likely to happen. This argument makes a ton of sense if programming weren't programming, if it weren't weirdly quirky when it comes to the kind of task it is. So if we were just building chairs, yes, you should split up your workers, and people should work independently, and they will produce more chairs than if they paired up, because the efficiencies gained are not big enough to counteract. But let's think about programming and why it's different. And I think it's useful to imagine you have a team of, let's say, 5 or 6 engineers, and you're adding a new person to that team. What impacts how productive that person is? I think there's 4 big factors, and the last one I think is the biggest. But let's start with codebase familiarity. You would never expect a person who was new to a team to be as productive as someone who had been on that team for a while. And the big reason is because it takes a long time to get up to speed with a code base. You have to understand how it works and where the pieces are and what things are named and what to grep for and all that. Pairing is a big help with this. I think the fastest way to onboard a new engineer is to pair with them for a while. It takes a long time to load this stuff in your head. Documentation helps for sure. Great names help. Useful comments help, absolutely. But when it comes to someone shipping code on their first day, week, month, having a more experienced person sitting with them and answering questions live, guiding them, showing them even how does the ticketing system work? Is there a format for commit messages that people like? Whose job is it to move it to this next step of the pipeline? What are the sort of semi-unwritten rules of the team? I don't think there's a better way to convey that to a new person than to pair with them. Next is programmer skill, right? Totally affects productivity. How good are you with this? Have you been doing it a long time? Do you have a broad, large bag of tricks that you know and great habits, great techniques? And here again, I don't actually know of a better way to spread skill around a team than to pair. The times in my life where I have improved the most at pairing were when I improved the most at programming were when I was pairing with someone stronger at programming than I was all day long. And this makes sense because humans have been learning stuff this way for thousands of years. It's just the apprenticeship model. You're working with someone more experienced. They're providing you feedback on your work as you go. You are watching what they do and modeling them, stealing tricks from them, catching lots of little things that maybe they don't even know they're doing. If there's a better way of getting better at programming faster, I'm not aware of one. I think it's the highest bandwidth, best fit for how our brains are already wired. The next is coordination. You've added a new programmer to the team. Now they have to communicate with people, right? You have a new node in the communication graph, and that increases the communication overhead. Pairing answers this in a kind of obvious way. If you're working in a pair and you swap that pair every so often, knowledge is naturally and automatically flowing between nodes. Very much helps. And then the final factor, I think, is actually the biggest one. And this is, to me, what makes programming different than almost any other discipline and makes intuitive objections or sort of intuitive guesses at what makes you fast or slow wrong. So in programming, we are typically adding things or changing things in an existing code base. And the choices that we make and the quality of the code that we create affect us tomorrow. It affects us next week or next month or next year. So in the early days of a project, everyone is fast. You can't tell how good your team is when you just first started a greenfield project, right? Because every feature goes out quickly. It's no big deal. There's no context. There's no existing code to fight you, to have to understand. It's beautiful, right? If only they could all be greenfield projects, that would be great. The reality is, after the first 6 months, it's no longer greenfield. And I think a lot of us have had the experience of working on a legacy code base that's been around for a while that maybe doesn't have the highest code quality. And it can really, really slow you down. And the fact that I'm familiar with it, that I have pretty high skill, that my coordination overhead is not too high, is probably all dominated by the quality of that code base. I've had the experience of trying to ship features on something that was super, super gnarly, and something as easy as like a name change of a single column or enforcing a new constraint or something can just be a massive project that requires a huge amount of work just to understand what's going on, and you can feel the system fighting you in all kinds of ways. And over the time frame of months and years, I think code quality dominates almost all other factors around programmer productivity. If after 2 years you have a pristine code base, beautiful, sensible names that are consistent, excellent documentation, really high quality, great test coverage, it can still be a joy to work in something. It can still be you can still be really fast years in. I think even if you drop that quality by 20%, if you're working at 80% for several years, the gnarly bits add up. It's that the code quality falls over time, and that's its natural state. Even if you're writing good code, the more of it there is, the harder it is to make changes, right? That just seems always true because it's difficult to write code that is perfectly decoupled. You almost always have to think about the whole system or big parts of the system instead of just what you're looking at and want to change. Pairing, I think, is an amazing tool for this. If I am writing code with someone, I'm going to write higher quality code, partly because there's a bit of light social pressure where I don't want to do the wrong thing, or I want to write my best code when my colleague is there with me, looking over my shoulder. I want to, write a great test, write a great commit message. I want to be proud of what we're doing, so I don't feel that maybe just subtle judgment of shouldn't we do this? We know we should do this cleanup now. Shouldn't we just do it as part of this commit? That sort of thing. Also, there's just two people working on this problem, so even if I have amazing habits and I'm going to write the best code that I know how all the time, I'm working at 100%, I'm never tired or distracted, still, I'm going to write code that's even better than that with a pair because we know different things, right? That person is going to have an idea that I wouldn't have thought of. They might suggest a great name that I wouldn't have thought of, or realize, oh, hey, we already have a reusable component for this somewhere over here. It's just, I think it's kind of impossible to write the code that will come out of a pair, I think, will almost always be better than a solo person. It seems impossible not to. The Venn diagram of your knowledge is not perfectly overlapped, so they know some things you don't. So every so often that will just help and push the code quality up higher. So if I split my programmers up, won't they get twice as much work done versus a pair? Well, yes. if they're making chairs, each chair doesn't affect the next chair, right? But each commit affects the next commit. And because of that weird nature of programming, where we're constantly making changes to an existing body of work and constantly accreting more of that work that then affects the next bit of work, quality matters more than almost anything. And so if you want to keep shipping fast, you want your code quality as high as possible. And I think pairing is just the best, most reliable way to keep that quality super high. And so that penalty you pay by grouping programmers together and having them work in pairs is actually more than made up for by reducing that long-term drag on your team's productivity.